Hi again. Another in the series on the Rhodesian Bush War. And as I mentioned before, books written by the chaps at the sharp end sometimes contrast with the official histories and the memoirs of the senior officers. And that's the case with the next book we're going to talk about, which is this book, Shadows of a Forgotten Past to the Edge with the Rhodesian SAS and Selous Scouts by Paul French. Now, Paul French was a British chap who had served in the Reserve SAS, 21 SAS, gone out to Rhodesia, joined the Rhodesian SAS, and then went into Selous Scouts. And the book covers all of that, and there's some really interesting parts to it. For example, when he goes to Rhodesia, he's promised that himself and the other experienced guys, some other Brits and so on, Australians, with good military backgrounds, would just have to pass selection and then a little bit of retraining and then go into the operational troops. So they pass selection and then they're told they have to do a recruits course, which is kind of a step backwards. He actually thought about leaving there and then, but then he thought, no, I'll go through the process, I'll get badged, then I'll leave. And he found that the head shed was quite often telling lies and promising guys things that never happened, and it left a sour taste in his mouth. I actually met Paul once. He came to Liverpool when he was in Selous Scouts, back on leave. The gun shop in Liverpool was kind of a magnet for Rhodesians who were looking for bits of kit. And he came in there. We all went over to Mar Boyle's, the designated drinking hole, and had a really good chat. But he then, after going through the recruits course and so on, which he thought was just a complete waste run by a sergeant who was a bully, went in. He was on the selection after Jake Harper-Ronald, and they actually operated together. So they were doing the usual stuff, patrols, camp attacks and things like that, going over the Mozambique border, doing that kind of thing. And in Paul's opinion, a lot of the stuff they were doing was really the kind of stuff that an airborne infantry unit would do, the parachute regiment or someone like that would do. He didn't really think it was special forces. And he'd come into contact with Selous Scouts, and he thought he'd have a look over there. So he went through Scout selection. So an interesting part of the book is where he compares the three different selections he went through. He went through selection for 21, but he talks about a conversation he had with an old sergeant from 22 who said that in previous days selection had been very simple. Just a couple of trucks turn up, put the guys through a series of difficult marches and weed them out. And the pass rate was something like 5%. And these are already trained soldiers. And they thought, well, that's a big wastage rate there. So they brought in all sorts of ways to prepare the chaps for selection, and continue right up to the present time. The pass rate's about the same, 5%. So he said there's a lesson to be learned there. On a related note, the South Africans did the same with their special forces. They brought in psychologists, they brought in experts in anatomy, physiology, and they weeded out people, and they said, structurally, you will never ever pass selection. So they they sort of got a core of guys that were sort of suited to pass selection, same pass rate. Nothing that anyone seems to do can alter that pass rate if the selection is truly an authentic test for special forces. So selection for the territorial SAS is not exactly the same as for 22. Obviously, the guys do it over a longer period of time, but it's still a very, very arduous process. And as we saw a couple of years ago, 3 guys actually died attempting it. So it's it's right up there. Rhodesian SS selection has a phase. They do a build up and then they do a phase because they reckon the guys are so fit that they need to be worn down, and they call it a rev. And it lasted usually 24 hours. In his case, it seemed to be 48 hours. And it's just continuous for that period of time, PT or physical activity of some sort. One guy talked about having to tread water in the camp pool for hours and hours on end, things like that, just to absolutely burn them out. And then they take them up to the Inyanga, to the mountains, and start doing beg and carries and that kind of thing, log races, all sorts of things. Very, very hard. Then scout selection. This selection course was different to others I had done and was significantly harder. Selous Scouts selection course lasted approximately 30 days and were held at one of several camps in the Zambezi Valley. My course, which I did in September 76, was typical. At the beginning of the course, 200 African soldiers and 40 European soldiers, both regular and territorial. He lists the units that the guys were in, RLI, SAS, and all sorts of things. And he talks about the walk-in, where they stopped about 25k away and all have to walk overnight. He goes into week 2, week 3, starvation, eating a rotting baboon, all that kind of thing. And one of the things they had to do was parade at last light with matches, rifle, 1 magazine, full water bottle and a mug. And they had to go into the lake and until they were soaking wet, but except for the matches and the rifle. And then they were dropped off, and basically they had to produce a boiled egg. So that was a little test. And he also went through a type of selection for the South African Special Forces, which was purely psychological, because he was already been through several selections. They just put him through some psych stuff, and he reckoned that was just a waste of time. So he goes to the Selous Scouts, and he did some pseudo operations, which was the raison d'etre of that unit, and he met his guys, the Africans he was working with. All were in civilian dress, armed with AK-47s, RPDs, RPG-7 rocket launchers, Chinese stick grenades, webbing over the civilian clothes, and blankets wrapped around them. One multi-skilled individual had all this kit and rifles strung about him, plus a battery-operated record player on his head with a record playing. These guys were characters. So he did some of that, and then he did went into the recce troop, and started doing operations with them, including a free fall operation where they were sent in to Mozambique to blow a railway line. And there was him, uh, Dennis Crewcomb, and Wings Wilson. It was a three-man thing. And the free fall, they were dropped in the wrong place, something like 40k from where they should have been dropped. Very, very hot weather, and they ran out of water. And Dennis Crowcamp decided to go and collect water or find water, and he wandered off on his own, and they ended up being split. They the devices they had, they did find the railway line, put the devices on, but they were the wrong devices, and they were eventually uplifted by a column that was attacking a parallel target, and Dennis Crowcamp had to walk. And it was one of these long walks in the annals of Special Force history, and eventually got back to Rhodesia. And Paul French said the planning was abysmal. They weren't really given anything in the way of maps. He went and got a school atlas map, made his own escape map, and there was no real debrief and no lessons learned. So he wasn't too impressed, and eventually he went back to SAS, and he said the command there had changed. He obviously didn't get on probably with Brian Robinson, and went back to the new command structure there, and was involved in a lot of operation, including another major free fall operation, where commanded by Graham Wilson, and they dropped in as the advance party to blow a massive bridge way, way, way deep in Zambia, and they had to canoe around and secure charges to this bridge, and it was a completely successful operation, which kind of contrasted with what he'd done in Scouts. So he did lots and lots of other operations. There's lots of anecdotes in the books. He went down and joined South African Special Forces 6 Commando, and then continued in various parts of the world, operating as a contract soldier. It's a fascinating book. I say it's written from the point of view of the soldier. He's got a wry sense of humour. He was an expert free faller, both as a sport and for tactical reasons, and it really is one of the better memoirs of military operations.